God wants to teach you how to deal with the mess you got to go through now with respect to what you get to experience in God and Christ in an eternal heaven later. Southwest is safe for you. Welcome home.
Welcome to In the Word. We are so glad to be with you tonight. I have...
You do?
Kim Harrell
Hi,
here
everybody.
with us tonight. He is back.
Good to be here.
Pastor Ricky is out this week taking care of sweet April.
Yes, he is.
And so we are here with you tonight on In the Word, and it is going to be an amazing, amazing night. We're excited to be here. We're going to talk about further the message from this past weekend. It's going to be great. But as we get started, hey, if you have not invited your friends to join you at In the Word, make sure that you share this link, tag some people in it, invite them to join us on In the Word tonight. It's going to be great as we dig in deeper to this past weekend's message.
Yes.
And we have some fun questions. So we always start with, where are you at? Who are you with? Mm-hmm. We don't dance anymore. They took our dancing away.
That's too bad. Who did that?
I think Dan. Dan took our dancing away. So
Okay,
Dan
I want to
killed
start.
our fun.
I got to start.
Oh, just kidding. Here we go. Where you at? Who you with?
I got to start. I want to hear about Disneyland.
Oh, okay, friends. If you don't know, we talked about it a couple.
Living vicariously.
We are living vicariously. A couple weeks ago, we talked about our highs and our lows and some fun things we were looking forward to. And I took my kids to Disneyland for opening day. We had tickets from the year before, and so we got to go. Disneyland was amazing. We literally ate all the junk food. Like, you miss Disneyland for the food.
Yeah, so here's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
'Cause it's like 25% occupancy.
Oh,
so like 25% capacity. So if you but you had to wear a mask.
The whole time.
Right. So that's the trade-off. But if you told me, you go to Disneyland and 75% of the people would not be there,
yeah,
I would probably wear one of those World War I mustard gas masks all, with a hose on it all day.
You're so extra. You show up and they're like, all you have to do is wear this face mask.
What is it like when there's not 75% of the people there?
We went last year.
Seems like my dream.
Well, we went last year right before, we went May 7th or March 7th last year. So right before everything shut down. So it was pretty low capacity when we went last year too. But went on every single ride, even the new Star Wars one. So that's my second time on Millennial Falcon.
Okay. That one, or is there?
Oh, sorry, Rise of the Resistance.
Yeah,
we
so
went on Millennial
Falcon,
Falcon, which makes me dizzy because I'm getting older. I'm learning, and rides make me dizzy now. So 25% occupancy. Got on all the rides that we wanted to get on. Park closes early, closes at 7. I said that'll be the only time I ever close it down because no fireworks. But worth it. We had a blast. We ate all the things that we talked about favorite food the other day at amusement parks. Corn dog. There's that corn dog stand, not the corn dogs that they sell other places, but there's this red truck. I think it's called the Little Red Truck. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so good.
That's the one that sells the turkey legs too, right?
No, turkey legs are over by Tom Sawyer Island.
Oh, all right.
So I know, I'm such a nerd. Okay. So we had a good time. Right. So yeah, that was definitely my high from the week. My high from today was we had Cinco de Mayo for our staff.
Yes.
We had tacos and we did emotional health.
Tacos.
Yeah, you had a lot of tacos. These guys went back for third.
They were little street tacos. They're little guys.
There was nothing little.
They were really good.
Nah. We did emotional health training, which was fun. I feel like that was really fun for our staff. So we had a good day today.
It was great.
Yeah.
Really
all right.
Fun.
Question of the day. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. This is a fun one, you guys.
This is my wife would love these. Christy, if you're watching.
Yes.
So this is my wife. This is her right here.
So Table Topics is so amazing. They're such a fun little thing to buy a box of them, and they have all different categories you can buy, but you can sit them on your table and then you can ask questions. So here's your question, Kim.
All right.
If you were to own I have to preface this because Kim is the most practical person you will ever meet. So Kim is practical Kim, and I'm going to ask him an impractical question. Right. If you were to own a fabulously impractical car, what car would it be?
Okay, so my dream car growing up was a 911. That was as much as I could dream. So for sure, it would only have 2 seats. So that's my first thing. Go straight to two seats. It's nothing. No one can ride in the back.
Dan just said that you hate your children. That was rude.
No. I'll let them borrow it. They can drive. One child can go with me.
Yes,
one seat. Okay. My wife and I are one kid. That's it. You're not going to help anybody move in my practical and
You're not going to take the whole office staff to lunch.
So Yeah, give me a second. Do you have one? Do you have
Yes.
one? Okay.
Mercedes AMG coupe.
Okay, any AMG would be
any of the
good.
AMGs, but the coupe especially. Same reason, 2 seats.
Yeah.
I love my children, but I've been driving kids around for a
Yeah.
long time. Like I've had French fries in the seats for a lot of years.
If we're talking about like just terribly impractical, whatever,
Yeah.
it's got to be something like a Lamborghini or something like that.
So,
where it's
it
just
says
like
terribly impractical.
absolutely.
Terribly
Then it's gotta
impractical.
be, yeah.
Friends, what would your terribly impractical car be? Drop it in the comments. We'd
Like
love
the
to
one
hear.
from Dumb and Dumber. You know that? You know, like
The van?
in Colorado?
The van?
No, the one they
like
bought.
the dog van with like the, or the like the little scooter. When they're on
No.
the scooter together.
No. No, when they were in Aspen and they were spending all the money
Yeah.
and they bought the Lamborghini.
Oh,
You should watch
wasn't
it.
it a
You
wild
gotta watch it
color?
again. Yeah, it was like a bright one. All the Lamborghinis are super bright, I think. Red or yellow or something.
Yeah, Lamborghinis are
That'd be good.
legit.
Yeah.
At my
guess I've never
husband's
been
work
in
the
one
other
or
day, they
driven
had
one,
a
but-
lady who stole a car in Phoenix who was coming down the 10.
Mm-hmm.
So they had called ahead to say, hey, we have a lady. We're chasing her. Bright orange Mustang. Sean's like, you should have picked any color, but like for sure they're going to find you. Bright orange.
Did she steal it?
Stole it.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was rolling.
Steal a white
rolling deep.
car.
White car. A white
Yeah.
Ford or like a white Ford Explorer. I feel like all of our staff drives those, so you could come hide here. So guys, it has been a good week as we prepare to move back into the building. We are super excited for Mother's Day weekend. We have a lot of fun stuff that's going to be happening here on our campus. We're going to have food trucks out on our lawn. We're going to have games for people to hang out and just be in community together. You can watch church online this weekend. You can watch church on the lawn this weekend, or you can join us inside.
All three.
Yeah, all
so
three.
inside, you're going to have a mask the whole time. That's one of the safety precautions that we have on. If you don't feel comfortable yet coming inside, you can certainly sit outside. The lawn setup will be out there. It'll be video. So live will be inside.
Yes.
So the band will be inside. Rick will be inside. Everything will be streamed outside onto a screen.
Yeah.
And you can, like we've been doing for Church on the Lawn, you can take your mask off when you're in your seat outside. But just inside the building where everyone's going to keep masks on.
Yeah, it's going to be good. We're super excited. We can't wait. It's been over a year, So I said I cried when I pulled into Disneyland. I'm going to cry when I pull into church this week for sure. I'm just emotional, guys. All right. So this past weekend, what an amazing message as we just look at this relationship, right, between Jonathan and David. And I love that every single weekend as we're in this horizontal gospel series that we're just talking about the different relationships that we have. This weekend, the look at our relationship with our friends was so powerful. Some of the points that Ricky hit that really hit me were when he talked about the fact that a lot of our friends know connection, but not affection.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I think that is so prevalent now because affection takes a level of transparency that not everyone's willing to walk in. It takes an authentic friendship. And I think that we have a lot of surface level friendships. And a lot of that has to do with social media and what that has done for our interactions, right? And so I think there's a lot of connections. It's easy to connect to people. Even when you think of class reunions, like class reunions for my generation have really become a thing of the past because people will say they can connect with anyone they want on social media. So they see the people they want. Why would they want to do that? And so that makes me sad when we think of but that's not like true connection.
You're right.
You only put the things that you really want people to know on out there. And so that was a powerful point.
And that's another problem like we've had with the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Is that if you didn't have strong connections with people before the pandemic, you really couldn't make them during it. So the last year has been a struggle for people, and I mean genuine loneliness and genuine disconnection, and people have been isolated, and you have those surface level online kind of connections, but those aren't as good.
Yeah, they're not as deep,
good.
and so that's really hard.
Yeah.
He talked about the fact that gospel friendship is about covenant, not chemistry. I mean, obviously, and then he went on to say that there is some chemistry that happens in friendship. That's just the reality. But a lot of times, but I think that it all stems back to the fact that if you're only in it for connection and not affection, if you're only having this inch deep kind of a relationship with people, if they don't really know you, if there's not an authentic friendship happening, then of course there's not going to feel like this deep covenant relationship. Yeah. It's just going to be surface level.
A lot of our groups, as you know, do sermon based studies, so they'll expand on the. So a lot of our groups, even this week, are studying this. And one of the questions was, do we believe, as a discussion question, do we believe that most friendships are a chemistry or covenant, right? And largely, most of our friendships are chemistry because there's something either attractive or something. There's something about the relationship, but it's remains surface level and it's not covenant. Yeah. But then I thought too that aren't a lot of our, we call them friendships or connections, but they're about what I can gain from the relationship. It's like, it's not just chemistry. It's about what I can gain from the other person. And this are business relationships and things like that. These are all of your LinkedIn contacts or whatever that when the business relationship is over, then the friendship kind of fades. And then that's how you know what kind of a connection it was.
I think that that was why when we look at Jonathan, these are the points that Ricky had pointed out, but that Jonathan got excited and not jealous. Yeah. He got excited for David, but not fake happy. He got excited and not mad at what God was doing in their life. That's true connection, right? And so when we can say that, like, it's deeper than just chemistry, because if someone gets something I think I should have or I think I should deserve, but I can celebrate them, that is when true friendship happens, right? Like when we can celebrate other people without feeling jealous, without feeling angry, that's true friendship.
Right. And that's the difference. That's the contrast between Jonathan and his dad, Saul, that Saul was jealous, Jonathan was not. Yeah. And that's something Pastor Joe pointed this out in our sermon text meeting when we were talking about this. He said it's hard to be friends with someone you compete against, who you consider a competition, right? So that's true. And Saul viewed David as a competitor, but Jonathan didn't. Yeah. He was able to have a friendship with him because he didn't view him as a competition, as a rival, right? Yeah. He wasn't a rival.
I loved the final point that I wrote down was that God is still doing David things in your friends' lives, and he wants you to check back in. And I think that in a hard year where we may not have seen eye to eye on a lot of different things with our friends, this is a year especially that I would say, man, if you walked away from that message, or if you haven't watched that message, I would go back and watch it, because it is a sacrifice to have some of those conversations. And it is painful sometimes to step back into some of those harder conversations. But the reality is God is still doing things in people's lives, and you can't just cut them off. And obviously there's boundaries and there's healthy things. And there are people that you probably have toxic friendships and you shouldn't be friends with them. But the reality is for those people that God has intentionally placed in your life that are true friends, it's going to be hard. Any covenant relationship is hard. It's never supposed to be easy. Covenant relationship in your marriage, the covenant relationship of friendship, that's just the reality. But when you have deep relationships, when you can walk through those hard situations, you're going to come out on the other side better. And so what a fun message this week on friendship. I was super grateful for it. I heard it a couple different times, and just thankful for the fact that we can talk to people about what does it look like for the friends in your life. So tell us a little bit more about friendship. The passage. Yeah.
So we're going to take a quick run through 1 Samuel. If you have your Bibles, it'd be great if you join us in 1 Samuel. We're going to look at a little bit of the setup, maybe take 10 minutes or so to run through like 17 chapters of 1 Samuel just to see how we get, because Ricky was talking in 1 Samuel 18, and we want to see how we kind of got there and why. I want to talk about how this friendship between David and Jonathan is like one of the most unlikely friendships in the Bible. It was one of the best and strongest friendships that we can even reference in the Bible, but it's also one of the most unlikely. Begins in 1 Samuel 1, and actually I believe Ricky's teaching on that this passage this week. It's the birth of Samuel. It's Hannah. Yeah. It's his mom, and she's finally able to conceive kids. She has Samuel, and she dedicates him to the Lord. And Samuel becomes, really, a lot of people consider him the last of the judges, and really a prophet for his time. And we see throughout the book of 1 Samuel, this is going to be the book of 1 Samuel is about Saul the king, and ultimately then David. But ultimately, Lord anoints Samuel as a prophet, and by the time we get over to 1 Samuel chapters 5, 6, and 7, in chapter 7 and 8, Israel's demanding a king. So what they've done is Israel's looked around them. They've looked at all of the countries around them, and everyone else has a king. So Israel wants a king. And the idea, though, that God was to be their king and he was their people, and but the people wanted to be like everyone else. And Samuel tells them that that's not what they want. He warns them against a king. And ultimately, in 1 Samuel 9, God gives them Saul as a king. And it's everything. He's everything they want in a king. Tall guy, strong, handsome guy. He's everything you'd want in a king. But the problem is Saul's going to have like character problems, right? He's going to have these character issues, and these kind of slowly get revealed to us because Saul initially is victorious in battle, and things are going pretty well. He has this victory over in 1 Samuel 11, the Ammonites. He has a great victory in 1 Samuel 11. And then we get over to this battle with the Philistines. We see this first little chink where we see that Saul starts to kind of pursue his own priorities instead of God's priorities, and he gets impatient. Samuel's supposed to come and pray, and there's a blessing, and Saul kind of takes charge of that. He gets a little bit impatient. You're like, okay, maybe this guy isn't a man of faith, kind of walking close to God, and that's just kind of one of the first signs of it. We meet Jonathan actually in 1 Samuel 14. There's another battle with the Philistines, and we see Jonathan's on the battlefield. Jonathan is a military leader, and he has victory because he has faith. There's a demonstration of Jonathan's faith in 1 Samuel 14. But then we see Saul's impatience again, and there's a contrast where you see Saul's son seems to have faith and seems to love the Lord and seems to be following the Lord, and the Lord is with him. But Saul, impatient, doing his own thing. The Lord seems to be pulling away from Saul. And ultimately, we see in 1 Samuel 14 and 15 that Saul's disobedience finally results in God saying, down in 1 Samuel 15, he says that he regrets that he made Saul king. Wow. So he regrets he made Saul king. He goes, he sends Samuel, the prophet, to go anoint another king. So Samuel goes to the house of Jesse, Bethlehem, and he's just interviewing. Jesse's sons are coming in, and he's like, tall guy, handsome guy, strong guy, this has got to be him. And God keeps saying, no. They finally get to the point where he's like, well, do you have any more sons? And he says, yeah, their youngest, he's out tending the sheep. And they say, go get him. And as soon as he comes in, God said, that's him, rise and anoint him, that's him. And it's David, right? It's David, it's a shepherd boy. Because he says that the Lord doesn't look the way man do, the Lord looks at the heart. Yeah. So David is anointed king while Saul is still king. So that's going to cause a problem long term, right? So
just a little bit.
Right. You think that anyway. So, but what's fascinating is right after that, David's dad, Jesse, sends him with some bread. His brothers are out and they're fighting the Philistines. They're at the battlefield. Sends him with some bread. We're in 1 Samuel 17. And this is the famous, this is David and Goliath, right? Yeah. So he sends with some bread for his brothers, and this Philistine is out trash talking big time. And David is like, is anybody going to do anything about this guy? And pretty much the army of Israel is like, not really. We're not going.
We're going to leave him there.
Right. So David goes out, and Saul tries to convince him not to, and tries to give him his armor. Doesn't want to wear it. Dave picks up 5 river rocks and lands one right in Goliath's forehead. Yeah. Cuts his head off with his own sword. Guys love this story, right? So
seriously,
get to the end of 1 Samuel 17, and Saul has this conversation with David, and then we pick up the passage that Ricky brought us into 1 Samuel 18. So it says, as soon as he walked off the battlefield, after speaking with Saul, it says Jonathan, this is 1 Samuel 18, verse 1, it says Jonathan's soul was knit to the soul of David. It said, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So this is interesting because Jonathan was the son of the king. Yeah. So Jonathan would have been heir. He was the rightful heir to the throne. Yeah. And when you see someone like David, who has been anointed king, Jonathan should see David as a threat. He should see David as a rival. But there's something in this passage. There's something that happens here where Jonathan sees David as this authentic believe, this authentic man of faith, and that God's with him. There's something there that Jonathan sees and just falls in love with the guy, just not in just this deep friendship that they have. And it said Saul takes him, puts him in the service of his house that day. But then in verse 4, and Ricky talked about this in the message, something important happens in 1 Samuel 18, verse 4. Because as the way Jonathan should see him as a rival, it says this, and Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. The robe is significant. The robe is symbolic. The robe is partly Jonathan's identity as a son of the king, right? So he's deferring to David, and he's saying, I'm giving you my robe. This is what I have the right to, but I'm giving you my belongings. I'm giving you my family robe, and now you are my brother, and I'm deferring to you. Then he goes one step further, and he gives him his armor. He was using this. Jonathan was a military leader. We saw him have a victory in 1 Samuel 14. So this is his armor. Yeah. So not only he's saying, you're now the guy. You're in the family. He's saying, you're my leader. Yeah. Like this, he's like, you are a better military commander than I am. Here's my armor. So those are all deeply symbolic stuff. If you want to look at a kind of a comparable story, Luke 15, the prodigal son. Yeah. When the prodigal son returns, the father gives him the robe, right? It's kind of the same idea. It's that right that a son has in a family, right? So you see that relationship, but then immediately we see another scene. We see them coming home. David's had victory. And so this is it. In 1 Samuel 18, verse 6, as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. So far, so good. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands. Again, still good. Still good. All good to this point.
It's going to get bad right
then
now.
Then it says, and David struck his 10,000s. Yeah. There's the problem. Yeah. So now it says Saul was very angry. And it said it displeased him. And it says later in that verse, it says, what more can he have but the kingdom? Like they're saying that David is more successful than I am. So the only next thing is that David was going to want the kingdom, which is ultimately going to be the case. Yeah. Then we see through 1 Samuel 18, several attempts on David's life. Interesting, Saul cooks up a bit of a scheme where he is going to give David one of his daughters in marriage, and he's going to create this snare. This is in 1 Samuel 18, verse 17, because he's going to have the Philistines. This is an adult conversation we're about to have. He says that ultimately David can't pay the marriage price. He can't give any tribute to Saul for the bride. So he said, oh, David, I'm not going to ask for anything. All I want you to do is go get me 100 foreskins from Philistines, right? So you can imagine they're not going to do that voluntarily, right? So there's going to have to be some guys killed here, and you'd think that would be the end of it, right? You'd think that'd be the end of it, but in it says the king desires. This is in verse 25. The king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, and you'd think, okay, well that's going to be a problem. David's not going to go for that. But then in verse 26, David goes, no problem. No problem. It says it pleased David well. And he goes off, ultimately comes back with 200, right? No problem, brings 200 back. So David has Saul's daughter, Michal, and that's another reason that Saul shouldn't like it, but that's another attempt on his life. It doesn't work out. Ultimately, multiple more times, and we see throughout 1 Samuel 19 that Jonathan warns David about Saul is trying to kill him, and ultimately there's this covenant that's made between them. Continue on, you see in 1 Samuel 19 several more attempts on his life, and then throughout you get into 1 Samuel 20. Jonathan ultimately 1 Samuel 20. Verse 16, Jonathan and David create this plan that Jonathan's going to be able to warn David if Saul's still angry him, and David can't return back to Saul's house. They come up with a plan. Ultimately, David's warned by Jonathan again, and it says in verse 25. This is 1 Samuel 20, verse 23. It says, "The Lord is between you and I forever and ever." And then ultimately this this covenant that they have. And we see in verse 42, it says, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. This covenant relationship, Ricky talked about this a little bit in his message, this covenant that they would make at the time, it's a promise, but it's like a promise like on steroids. It's like a super promise where they would literally, they would sacrifice an animal so that both of the parties would look at the sacrifice and they say, if I break my promise, if I break this covenant, may I be like this animal. Yeah. May I die like this animal died if I break this covenant. So the covenant is that ultimately, not only between David and Jonathan, but between their kids and their descendants. So Jonathan ultimately dies in a battle against the Philistines in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel. Saul dies right after, a couple verses after that, falls on his own sword. And so that's it. David becomes king. And David ultimately becomes king of all Israel. Mm-hmm. But we see this covenant and the importance of the covenant and this covenant friendship and the way it plays out. Yeah. Because in 2 Samuel, next book, David's fully king of Israel. Yeah. And it says in 2 Samuel 4, verse 4, it says, Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news of Saul and Jonathan came to Jezreel. So when Jonathan died, he was a 5-year-old, right? Yeah. And it said, and the nurse took him up and fled, was running away, and when she fell, he became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. And this is Jonathan's kid. This is Saul's grandson, right? Yeah. So that happens in 2 Samuel 4. 2 Samuel 9, David asks a question. He says, is there anyone left in the house of Saul that I might show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? So he's remembering the promise that he made to Jonathan, this covenant that he had. So is there anyone? And his servant said, yeah, there's still Jonathan's son. And he said, well, bring him to me. Yeah. He said, well, he's crippled in both feet. So anyway, the scene comes in. Mephibosheth comes into the house. And we have to remember at the time, what was common in the day was that any potential heir, if there's anyone who had a claim to the throne, they were going to be killed. The king that took power was going to eliminate any possible descendants that had a claim to the throne. Yeah. So Mephibosheth is coming in thinking and he calls himself a dead dog. He's like, he just believes he's walking in, but David says this in verse 7, 2 Samuel 9, verse 7. He said, David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you always all the land of your Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. So what ends up happening is David gives Mephibosheth all of Saul's land, and as he's a handicapped individual who's eating at the table of the king of Israel. And it says that he's there for his whole life. All of his servants work for him. They tend his fields for him, but Mephibosheth lives and eats with the king. And it ultimately said, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, and for he ate always at the king's table. And that's the story of how important this relationship was to David. Even after Jonathan's gone, years have gone by, and he still shows that kindness to his son. He remembers that covenant. So when we talk about covenant friendship, I honestly don't know if we have a full grasp of covenant. I was discussing it with some guys in a group, men's group, and we think probably the closest thing we know today is like a marriage covenant. Yeah, that may be the only thing we covenant.
And even marriage covenants. I was thinking through that when you were talking about the seriousness of a covenant, right? So like any kind of covenant, I don't know that anyone takes it as serious anymore as what it would be. So it's so hard because you would think marriage covenant is the most coveted relationship. Right. Like that's like exactly the highest, and then everything else would be, something less than that. But if we don't even take that covenant serious, then everything else is just kind of like a watered down version of what a covenant should be. But when you look at at what the word says about covenant relationship, there was sacrifice with it. There was it was a much deeper meaning than what we have now.
And probably even more important than human relationships is we have to remember the covenant that God makes with his people, and God keeps his covenant perfectly. Like we keep covenants imperfectly, but God keeps perfect covenants. So when God makes a covenant, he never breaks them. When God makes a covenant, he's always faithful. And that's something we have to keep in mind, that even people who may not have a lot of close friendships right now, you can absolutely trust God, and you can absolutely trust his faithfulness to you. And he is always 100% perfectly faithful.
Yes.
And we can't use our human relationships as a reference to that, because we don't know. Like you were saying, we have no real reference for what true commitment and true dedication and true covenant is, because God has kept his covenant from the very beginning. You know, for right now, probably 4,000 years since that original covenant with Abraham.
Yeah.
He's always kept his word. So, the friendship of David and Jonathan, if we want to look at a New Testament like friend, who, you know, you talk about Jonathan who he went to Saul and spoke up for David.
Yeah.
If you look at a New Testament guy like that, you can go and look at Barnabas in Acts chapter 9. He's a guy like that spoke for Paul, who was Saul of Tarsus, different Saul, but Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul, and how he traveled with him on his first missionary journey.
Yeah.
And it says that when Paul's writing about him in the book of Galatians, he said he talks about Barnabas as having the right hand of friendship. He's going to be his right hand. So, you know, for all of us, I know it sounds weird to tell you that you need a Barnabas. You got to hang a female tag on that, because for me, it's
Barbie.
whatever
Barbie
the female
Barnaba. We'll call her Barnaba.
Barnaba. I don't know if that's right. Anyway, every one of us should endeavor to have a Barnabas, somebody that will walk alongside of us.
Who's your Barnabas?
I have a few.
Okay.
I have a few, and I don't want to make anybody feel bad.
Oh, so you don't want people to feel like they'll feel left out if they're...
But no, I'm lucky.
I'm
lucky that I have close friends. I will. Let me tell you a story though. This won't make anybody feel bad.
Do you want everybody to be your friend? Is that why, like?
No, and this is the thing. Not everybody can be a Barnabas to you, right?
Yeah.
It's not everybody can be. It's a special friendship. But I have a friend named Dave who went with me on a mission trip to Nepal, and it was just going to be two of us, and it was just a 2-person trip, and it was going to be a teaching trip. And he's a good teacher, but he knew that I was going to be doing the majority of the teaching. And we were sitting there one day just talking about planning the trip. We were buying plane tickets or something. And he looked at me and said, "Man," he said, "I really think that I'm Barnabas this trip." Like he was there.
Oh.
Yeah, it was so cool. It's like he was like a Barnabas.
He was your woo girl.
He was my right hand. I don't have a woo girl.
It's like woo. You had to have
that's
like someone who's cheering for you.
Totally different.
They're cheering for you. He was cheering for you.
He had my back. Yeah. Not the same thing.
Woo girl.
Not the same thing at all. But he did some teaching there himself.
That's
but for the
amazing.
most part, he just felt like it was his job to like support and encourage me on that trip, and it was huge. It was huge. So that's an example of for a time someone who was a Barnabas. But yeah, there should be someone in our life who will speak up for us, and there should be someone in our life who will go to bat for us.
Do you still have friends from your childhood?
No. Well, here's the problem.
Military.
Well, no. Like Facebook connections and things like that, but I'm not connected with anybody. I grew up in Denver and went in the military, kind of lost touch. Have reconnected with a few people, but real surface level stuff, you know, on social media and stuff like that. Yeah. So I would say that most of my true good friendships have
come later
come
in life,
and after I became a believer, and guys that kind of walked with me for a while.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have some strong friendships?
I have strong friendships. I have friends from, my oldest friend is from like when I was a year old. We're still friends. We're still good friends. Our families were really good friends. Still have those connections. Kind of like, you know, they're the friends that would like the Jonathan and David that would take care of your kids if something happened. Like I have some pretty good friends like that, but it's really important to have friends.
It's
so important to have friends out, even friends that, you know, for me, it's finding friends that I can talk to outside of ministry that don't just want to know all the ministry things, you know, like from me. It's nice to just have a friend who can just be a friend.
And like pastor to pastor, you know how important it is to have people that don't consider you a pastor.
100%.
They know you as a friend either before or they know you separate from that. And it's because all of us need that time, that moment where you don't have to be like on, like where you don't have to be on the whole time. And it's not that your behavior changes or anything like that. It's just no one expects you necessarily to be the one to pray at the meal or to do whatever or to do whatever.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you're not expected to perform as a pastor in that relationship. You're just a friend. Yeah. So
So good. I love looking at the before and how Saul got to where, I love that you started with how Saul got to where he was and how it was almost a slow fade to see his character, right? Where it was like the more that he got the more his character. But then you see his son who just has like total integrity and character, and just understood so much more a bigger picture, you know.
And then Saul's jealousy ultimately eats him alive. He ultimately almost goes crazy chasing and trying to kill David over several chapters.
And really it ended up being just this thing that would divide his family as well. Because imagine being Jonathan, who finds out that, no, my dad is trying to kill this person who's good, who's called, who's anointed really to be the king, because that's who had been anointed as the next king. And Jonathan has to make a decision between his dad and his best friend. That's covenant friendship, because he had to choose what was right. And what was right was that David was called to that, and he had to choose that. But imagine that.
And by choosing David, he eliminates himself
100%
as an heir.
100%.
He relinquishes all of his rights.
Yeah.
In that
Which
same
David
moment.
married one of Saul's daughters, so it's keeping it in the family, really. I mean, like, it's.
But he was marrying and hoping he'd be killed, right? He's going.
I know. It was so selfish.
He sends him after these Philistines, thinking, well, they're going to kill him.
Yeah.
And it's not going to work out.
And then he comes back. He's like, hey, he knocks on the door. I'm back. Guess who's back? Back again. David's back.
Yes,
Tell a friend.
With a sack full of goodies.
Yuck. All right. Do you guys have any questions tonight? After that one, we love to answer questions, and Kim's a good one to ask all kinds of like crazy questions. Kim can answer random. Last week we talked about burial versus cremation.
Oh,
last week,
which was
really good. I think that there was, there's some that just don't know what the right answer is to that, and so that was great conversation last week as we dove in deeper to like, what does that look like, and really it's burial or cremation. It's up to you, right?
I mean, so much of it is traditional. Because originally, the Jewish people, that there was a split. Some Jews believed in resurrection, some didn't.
Yeah.
And the ones that did believe in resurrection believed that you would be resurrected onto the bones of your original body. So you'd be buried in the family crypt, and then however long it took for your body to decompose, they would go back later and they would collect the bones, and then they would put you in a bone casket because they could store more bodies in the family crypt. So you'd have smaller bone caskets that just had the skeletal remains of all the family members, because they really honestly thought you'd be reanimated on the bones. So that kind of crept forward into Christian, I guess, thinking, culture and tradition. It's more tradition.
It is definitely.
But I can honestly tell you that God can reanimate anything.
He can.
And it's kind of funny. John Wycliffe, you guys probably, I don't know if you know Bible translators, Wycliffe Bible translators, but he has in 1380s, he is one of the first guys to ever translate the Bible from the Latin Vulgate at the time, which was the church. That was the Roman Catholic Church had the Latin Vulgate. He translated into English, and the church didn't appreciate that very much, and they actually had him burned at the stake, and he was a martyr. But like 40 years after he was martyred and was killed, they dug up his body, and they burned him, and then they scattered the ashes in a river due to that tradition, due to that thinking that they didn't want him to be reanimated on his skeleton, so they burned his bones.
Wow,
and then they
it's not funny. It's so
scattered his ashes in a river. But I will tell you,
oh my gosh, they were so fearful.
Our God is certainly able to reanimate anything.
Yeah, they can find it.
That's not an issue.
Yeah, God can find those ashes.
Yeah, it's not an issue either way.
Not an issue.
Either way. It's personal choice. So that's the correct answer.
Yeah, so
but
fun.
A lot of fun tradition and crazy doings.
Yeah.
The church has done a lot of fun things.
I know. That's what I love reading church history. Church history, I think we only ever look through.
You cannot make it up. It's better than any movie ever.
And Old Testament is that way too.
Oh man.
I think people are like, oh, Old Testament's boring. And it's like, oh my gosh, no. The stories in Old Testament there's some crazy. It's like an action-packed. There's so much war. There's men love Old Testament.
Yeah.
You guys could live there.
The book
so this
of
week
Judges,
on your
questions,
you're on the horizontal gospel. We had questions this past week in what are some of the questions that were there? You mentioned one that you guys talked about, which was the chemistry, right?
Yeah, one of them was our friendships are it says that our gospel friendships based more on chemistry or covenant, and then the extended question is what are our general friendships based on chemistry or covenant, and then I think the call to action is how can you look for and develop deeper gospel friendships in your life, and I'll tell you from my perspective, we moved out. Christy and I moved to the desert in 2004, and we knew a few people here, but for the most part, neither of us had close friends when we moved out here. And it was actually the people who were in our first couple of small groups have really remained our closest friends to this day. Yeah. So I think that one of the ways that people can look for and develop deeper gospel friendships is just joining small groups and getting involved at the church and meeting some people who you can just kind of do life with. Yeah. That worked for us. And I mean, we're here, close to almost 20 years later, and those are still really our strongest friendships that we have.
I love that friendships too. It really is family. So they have helped. Some of the friendships that we have from our small groups or the people that I've met here have really helped us even in like just being a second voice for my kids to hear from as well. And I trust them. And so
that's the thing, you trust them. Like they're not going to tell your kids crazy stuff.
No, they're not. Yeah. I mean, hopefully not going to tell them crazy things. But anyways, this was a good word tonight, Kim. Thank you so much for sharing deeper on Samuel and then Saul and then David and Jonathan and letting us see just the history of that. I think that gospel friendships is a thing that we'll have to continue to talk about this year as we continue to face just different things in society, different things in context of what's going on with all the different things like that we face every day, whether it be COVID, whether it be politics, whether it be just social justice, all the different areas. We're going to have to continue to have gospel friends who we can have really authentic, deep conversations with. And so it's going to be a year of really pointing people to what does the word say? How do you have the conversations? How do you cheer on people? How do you encourage friends? And who are your friends? Who is your Barnabas? Like, I think we need to be constantly asking that question this year so that, we don't end up in a lonely.
Yeah. And I think honestly, this is a difference between men and women. I think women do a better job making friends than men do. Men, for large measure, we don't do a good job. We don't do a good job seeking out close friendships. And largely it's because our culture has reinforced in us this Lone Ranger mentality. Yeah. And something we always say in men's ministry is that Christianity is a team sport. Yeah. That Christianity is not an individual. You were never intended to go through life as a Christian as an individual. You were always supposed to have people around you. So we always encourage friendships and accountability groups and everything. And I think the first step is for guys especially is to get in some groups. Yeah. It's a risk. Yeah. It's more of a risk, I believe, for guys than it is for women because you guys kind of crave that. We don't crave it as much.
It's not as natural for men. Not. I think that's why reading the story of Jonathan and David is I'm always like in awe of how intentional the Lord is with us in his word. I think he always puts things that it's like, man, he was so sweet in including this story because, man, it is harder for guys, but he puts a perfect, beautiful example. Yeah. And it's like on the battlefield that they become friends, right?
Absolutely.
It's not like in a palace. It's like on the battlefield. That's right. You just chopped off someone's head. Let's be best friends. Yep. Like girls aren't like that. I'd be like, ew, yuck. I don't think so,
But and then New Testament, you see Barnabas with Paul. Yeah. And then when that's first missionary journey. Second, he picks up Timothy and Silas. Yes. He has Luke. He always has these guys that have his back, and so we see that the relationship. Jesus sends them out in twos, right? There's a reason Jesus sends people out in twos.
So I would say
very important.
If you have an amazing friend in your life, text them today. Tell them thanks for being your friend. That's a good action step. Text your friends. Tell them thank you for being a friend. Because friends are friends forever. Like the Michael W. Smith song. I was going to sing it tonight. Friends are friends forever.
Go ahead. Take us out. Take us out with a little Michael W. Smith.
Remember that song? That was a good one. So you should text your friends. Tell them you're thankful for them. Appreciate them in this. And if you have some friends that you need to have a hard conversation with, man, have the hard conversation. Because I just think it's important all the time as believers, but I think it's always important to take the first step in just reconciliation. And God can do miracles. And I am excited to see how God uses the gospel friendship message from last weekend to really just make an impact in our valley as we begin to look more and more like what Jesus would want us to look like as believers. And so it's encouraging. It's good stuff. You want to say the Aaronic blessing for us? It's always like a thing. Last week it actually worked because Ricky was here, but typically Tim and I argue over who's going to do it, and then it like cuts off, and then everyone's like, "Who did it?" So I would say, Kim, you can do the Aaronic blessing tonight.
I would, and they always tease me because I always tell people where it comes from.
You should,
because there's like
you should tell the history.
But I'm
Kim's
not
the history. No, you're like the history teacher. You should tell the history. Tell the history. Teach it, Kim. We tell Ricky, preach it, Ricky, and we tell Kim, teach it.
From Numbers chapter 6.
Yes.
It's a blessing that the Lord gave to Moses. When the priesthood was established, he wanted Moses to speak this blessing over Aaron and his sons. This is going to be the Levitical priesthood that's established in the Old Testament. So it's called the Aaronic blessing because it's Aaron. It's not ironic.
It's not
like
ironic.
Some people pronounce it. It's not an ironic blessing. It's an Aaronic, like as in Aaron. But the Lord gives this to Moses. So we actually get the opportunity to pass this on to you. So you guys just receive this. This is the Lord. His words. He says, "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace."
All right, guys, have an amazing
next time.
evening. We'll see you this week at church.